My name is Gary Petoskey. I am the sports editor of the Philadelphia Inquirer. My panel includes Donnie Collins. He's the Penn State beat writer for the Times Tribune, and John Solomon, who covers college football nationally for CBSSports.com. Access to college sports. I think we're going to probably just end up talking about football. I don't know really a lot of access issues that people have with other sports. We can get into, I guess, basketball a little bit if there are some. I think mostly what we talk about is football. We got into it a little bit with the last session. It was pretty good. So I think we can probably establish that access in college football, major college football, like they have here at Penn State, is pretty challenging at times. So I would like to throw out a first question to my two panelists here. We also will have Dave Repson. Hopefully, he's a TV host at Big Ten Network, and he's on his way here. And he could talk a little bit about what he does and the Big Ten Network and their relationship with the schools and how they handle the journalism. But my first question is to my two panelists. There's Dave Repson. My first question is, since we know that the access is an issue, what do you do to improve the access, number one? And number two, when you can't improve it, how do you work around the fact that you have issues with access? And you can start.
Planning is the only way I can. Access is not something new. That's an issue. I mean, I've covered Penn State since 2004, and I've covered a little bit of Syracuse basketball over the years. Access is not easy anywhere. I mean, obviously, Penn State's a little more challenging now with some of the rules with the parents and things like that. But the way I try to get around it is, you might not get somebody when you want them, but you'll get somebody. Maybe you'll get them a week from now. Maybe you get them 2 weeks. You just have to plan ahead. And if you want to do a feature story, you think of what you want to ask a kid. When you see him, you start building up to it. You ask other people about it. It's just basic reporting. It's tough when you can't make a phone call to a kid and get them on the phone. It just is, because we're used to that at a fundamental level. I mean, we all covered high school sports, and you can do that with kids. And we've all covered some professional sports where you can walk into a clubhouse or a locker room and get a guy when he's available. That said, college sports is different for a lot of reasons, good and bad. So you have to do a little more planning, and that's the way I try to do it. I try to get kind of an idea of a story I want to do, maybe a little bit off the beaten path, and work on it a little longer than maybe we usually would like to. And that's the way I try to get around it.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I feel for you guys who are Penn State reporters, particularly if you're sitting through and hearing those questions to Sandy Barber. So God bless you all. I used to work in Alabama, so I'm pretty familiar with having dealt with Nick Saban, Alabama Crimson Tide. Auburn is not the greatest either, so I do feel your pain on that. One key thing I think to possibly do is just continue to try to build relationships with people. I mean, at the end of the day, the people who are making decisions on the access are human beings, and they're the SIDs, and largely they're the coaches and they're the athletic directors. So if you can connect with them in some way and building relationships and just having some level of trust a little bit, I think that's a good way around it. And one thing I would strongly encourage editors in particular is make sure reporters have the time to go build those sources. I mean, one thing I really see from college sports reporters these days is that I don't think they have enough time to source building. I think they're asked to do so many things, blog and doing video and social media and interacting. And there's been a lot of talk today about interacting with our readers, which is what we need to do, but we need to interact with our sources and get to know what's going on and build that trust. And I see that deteriorating quite a bit. It's sad to see.
Welcome, Dave. Thanks, Dave.
Sorry to blow in right at the beginning.
That's okay. It's good to have you. Do you want to weigh in on this first question of how to build it? I know you're coming from a different angle,
Right.
Television and being involved with the Big Ten Network. But.
Yeah, I mean, so I would say kind of my experience on this would be more when I was at ESPN, where you would have some of those same challenges. I remember covering the Final Four and requesting certain players afterward, and kind of we're not going to make this guy available. We're going to make this other guy available. just kind of finding it head scratching, right? Like we're trying to tell the story of your program, we're trying to tell it in the best way that we can, and it's, I mean, it's certainly is the largest sports outlet in the country, and why wouldn't you make people available? And I think as I made the transition to BTN and kind of understood all of the push and pull on students, which is kind of, I think, a little bit of what we're talking about here, I can relate a little bit more. I still think it does come back to, and it's funny that one of the really bad incidents I had at ESPN was with a Big Ten school, and then as I got to BTN and got to know those people and build relationships, I always wondered, had I known them, right, had I been coming to them with the same request 3 years later, might the way that they had handled the interaction, might the way, frankly, that I had handled the interaction been different. So I think it kind of speaks to what John was just talking about, which is building sources, building relationships. And there are these competing pressures now because everyone wants more. Everyone wants you to churn out, and what are you giving me today? You know, going and meeting with coaches isn't giving me something today. And so there is this push and pull that I think is really, really challenging. And I guess I don't know what the solution is because each school handles it differently. There's some schools where we don't really have, I don't hear the complaints about access quite to the degree that it sounds like that, it's a challenge here. But I don't think there's a hard and fast rule other than kind of do your job in the way that you were trained to do your job and hope that there's a respect and a recognition for that.
No, just a quick question. Have you had any access issues at all since BTN, obviously, you've had
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, here and there, more so than sometimes maybe than you would think. But again, I think this is what's really interesting, and this is where, and maybe this is a different conversation, right? But this is where our business is changing in so many ways now. You have these partnerships. So does PhiladelphiaEagles.com have access issues with the Eagles? Man, I hope not. But sometimes you hear these stories.
No, you don't. Not at all. They don't.
Okay. But I mean,
BaltimoreRavens.com have any issues with the Ravens. So.
But sometimes you hear these stories where it's crazy, where even internally the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing, and I think that's troubling and challenging. But look, we're in a different relationship, right? We are an equity partner with Penn State. The network is in an equity partnership with Penn State. They own a piece of our network. And so it is in their best interest, you would think, to cooperate. But it doesn't always work that way at every school. But it's certainly very different from being at ESPN or being at a local station. I mean, where you're not in a partnership. And I think this is part of kind of where the business is going. And I think it makes people a little uncomfortable, right? Like the Comcast Sportsnets, these are partnerships with the pro teams. They all have a share in this network. And so it's in their best interest to share their resources with that network.
Yeah, but what's disingenuous is they say it's time. Student athletes don't have time to do all this, but they'll make time for the Big Ten network.
Not always.
Sometimes, but mostly.
Right.
And they're telling us, well, it's too much for the student athlete,
Right.
they can't do this. But then, well, that's not true because they make time for certain
Right, but I would
partners.
say, so for instance, I mean, like if we request, when we do an interview for BTN Live, let's say, and we get a player, we often request 7 or 8 names. And then you find out that morning, well, this is who you got. Okay, hey, we got Hackenberg. Or we didn't, we got Andrew Nelson, right? And so I would say maybe it gives the appearance of, well, they got a guy, but it might not be I'm not, again, I'm using Penn State as an example because this is, everyone can relate to them, but it's every school. They might say, we'll get you a guy, but they won't necessarily get you the first guy we requested.
What is the, in your experiences, what is the reason that schools, I mean, we heard Sandy Barber answer some questions about that or having to address some of that, but what are the reasons that you hear from coaches or administrators about why they approach it this way, the ones who give you less access? Like, do they have a reason for it? Or is it just sort of the way it is?
student scheduling. Yeah, I hear that a lot, and they're busy. They're working on they have a big test this week, or that they have too many classes, and you do hear that quite a bit. I have my suspicions that it's not always that. I think the coach has a lot of sway in this, and I think that you could take student schedules out of it to a certain degree and put injuries. They don't want you, and here at Penn State, the big talking point here is, the access to the parents, where now you have to go through the university to talk to a parent. I do believe that that's a situation where they don't be calling a parent and saying, hey, Mr. Hackenberg, is Christian hurt this week? Is he going to play? And I think it's a strategy thing more than anything else at that point. But when you just straight up want to do a feature story on some kid, and it doesn't even have to be Hackenberg or even Andrew Nelson, it could be just somebody from your area. I've asked, I've generally gotten the kids from my area who I've asked for. But there are times where you ask for a certain kid and you don't get them, and they almost invariably say, well, the schedules just aren't working out. But then you never get them. So how does the schedule not work out? It's to that degree. And I don't want to make it sound like you never get the kid you want. You do. When you ask for a kid, you generally at some point get him. It's just a matter of, do you get him when you want him all the time? No, and that's where it gets frustrating for me.
I think a lot of it is honestly a trickle down from Nick Saban. When Nick Saban arrived, it became a one voice thing in college football, and people picked up on it. He's won big. Now, that doesn't mean because he's won and because he keeps media away and really restricts them, that means that's why he's winning. But people, it's a copycat business, and they see he's doing it. And then Jimbo Fisher started doing it, some of Florida State, and Dabo Swinney to an extent. Clemson does it. Lots of schools now do it. I mean, at Alabama, you get coordinators in August, the start of the year, one time, at August summer session, the August media day. Then you'll get them when they go to the bowl function. That's it, if they're required to, at the bowl function. You don't get freshmen all year. You don't get any other assistant coaches unless you're at the big media day, come playoff, championship time. It's very restrictive. You have SIDs even who are hovering over the questions being asked, and they will even interrupt sometimes of the questions. At an SEC Media Days, I was asking, and it was even a one-on-one access, because at CBS we got our own room at SEC Media Days. I'm asking a football player with a list of questions. One was about concussions. And the kid's getting ready to answer, and the SID goes, we're not talking about concussions. I said, I'm asking him, he's permitted to answer. He goes, we're not talking about concussions. I said, you want to answer this? He goes, I can't talk about it. So I mean, that's the mentality that you're fighting against, and it's difficult. It's really challenging.
So you have limited access. Let's say you don't get a player you want this week. You want him this week, not next week, for some reason. What do you do with a story like that? You just have to hold it? Is there a way to work around the limited access? Or I guess, what are the ways to work around limited access?
Well, for you guys, you should talk to parents, but you can't. So that was one of my ideas is talking to parents and high school coaches and talking to people who know the people. And honestly, if I were you guys, I would call parents if you're not getting them. What are they going to do? Are they really going to yank your credential away? I mean, I can't imagine that you guys are not allowed to cover Penn State football because you call a parent. I mean, at the end of the day, the parent can decide he or she is a grown-up. They either want to talk or they don't want to talk. That's their decision. But it's disappointing to hear Penn State doing that.
Is there any difference on the TV end about the parent role?
Well, I don't think we'd ever, I mean, I certainly have had some friendships with parents kind of through the years where they have kind of come up and introduced themselves, maybe with their email or whatever. But, part of that is just a different role for us. Now, if I had, like, let's say when I was ESPN, obviously we had people there trying to, it's different at BTM. We're not really trying to break stories. It's not really our role, right? It's just a different.
Well, the parent role, it could be just to tell stories. That's not necessarily.
I would agree, right. So we would do a formal request for the parent through the university, and if we're telling a story and they would feel that it would be better or beneficial to talk to the parent, we get it. again, that'd be a question that would be better like for our feature unit. I don't know, I don't think they're turned down very often because I'm kind of thinking through some of the best features we've done. I mean, they've had parents, they've had high school coaches. But again, like the initial ability to do that story is premised on the university saying yes, right? So, so kind of that gate's already been opened. The gatekeeper has opened it up for you, and then once they open it, they might as well open it to tell the story in the best way that you can tell it.
Donnie, you're a team beat writer here. So you have a lot of space in the paper to fill, online demands, so the access is limited. How do you go about doing that then, to do whatever to give out the kind of coverage you want, given the circumstances?
Well, it's a tough question because it's been the way I've had to do it for 10 years. So I don't know if there's any way I just go around it, or if it's just the way, we have to do it. They make us X amount of players available during the week, and there's times I'll see, why are they making this guy available? And then it'll hit me that there's a little bit of a connection between him and that school, or him and wherever they're playing. So that becomes, they try to direct you into the story almost. So you end up having that as an option. But like I said earlier, I mean, my goal is to come up with the most compelling story I can come up with for that space in a given day. And I'm generally not, if that's on a Wednesday, I'm not writing it on a Tuesday or doing the interview on a Tuesday. I'm kind of building up the interviews over over a couple of weeks and filling it that way. Working ahead is the only way I think I can do it with the access that we get, which, I keep saying this, if I request a guy, sometimes I get it. I mean, it is not impossible. But there are times where it's you can get the guy, but nowadays can you go step 2, 3, and 4 ahead with the parents? I mean, in Scranton we had the quarterback now McGloin a couple of years ago, and I can't go out in Scranton now without seeing a McGloin somewhere. It's something that you see, and we've built those relationships with them, and they're almost part of our daily lives. You get emails, you get all this. You get all this information from them, and, they're always updating you on, Matt's doing this, Matt's doing that, whatever. And it's something good that comes out of this, in a way, for the family, for Matt. Now, going forward, we still have local players in the team, but you don't get the emails, you don't get the phone calls, you don't get the heads ups, the text messages that always made it a little easier to do your job. And that's because of the policy here. And really, I think at the end of the day, that's the policy that I think frustrates us as beat writers mostly, is the parent one. It's not fair. I mean, as Sandy said earlier, and I get her point, but it's not they are grown human beings. They can talk if they want, and there should be no punishment for the player, for us, anybody. I never even considered they pull your credential or anything like that. I really think it's just to guard against injuries, but they take away the injury information coming out. But they take away so much of what you want to do that would shine a better light on your story. That it's nonsense sometimes. There's no common sense involved with the policy when it takes away from the story that they want told. But that's just my.
Gary, can I ask a question there along those lines? This is maybe as much for John as anybody else, because what's happened here, and Donnie can attribute to this, there have been a couple of situations at Penn State over the past couple of years where we're doing our jobs and we're breaking news, and the whole beat is held accountable. John says, well, what are they going to do? Well, we've had some situations here where stories were broken and the entire beat was punished by even less access. So, short of pulling credentials, which I don't think they would do, John or Dave, have you guys heard any stories like that in other places where you break the story of who's going to be the starting quarterback and the whole beat's punished? You talk to a kid who's competing for the quarterback job, you talk to his parents, and the whole beat's punished because we get fewer players. They've done that, and do you guys encounter any other places that go to those levels?
Yeah, I've heard that before. I experienced that, a decade ago covering Clemson. I used to cover Clemson, and you know, be a story, or I'd be calling someone I'm not supposed to call, you know, whatever that means. I'm a reporter, I'm gonna call who I need to call. And then, yeah, there would be restrictions or, you know, those type of punishments. I don't remember specifically. I don't know what to say to something like that. I mean, I don't think you don't do your job just because it may impact other people on the beat. I think you just have to go about it and do your job and explain why you made a particular call. I think you try to work within the parameters and the rules, but there are some times that that's just not going to work, and you just hopefully have to understand that. And there's always that constant tension a little bit.
It's funny too, and you know, access is not the panacea. I'm just thinking back to when we came here. So we come through obviously on our preseason football tour every year where we get to watch a practice for every school, and I know that on some beats, this one in particular, that sometimes causes a little bit of resentment among the people who cover the team. But I remember Rob Bolden's freshman year, we came in and watched practice. It was just obvious at that point that he was the most skilled guy. I mean, it obviously never played out, but to say the least. But it was like, it was really obvious that he was going to be the starter. I mean, he was just the best guy. And so I remember I tweeted that. I think Jerry and Howard tweeted it, and it took off. Like, it became this, because no one had seen him. No one had seen him with the Penn State team. Obviously, they'd seen him in high school in Michigan, I think, where he was from. And, you know, it just kind of took on this life of its own with people calling us, and what did you see? And then we had to, and then, you know, then I get the phone call from Guido, and, you know, like, Joe's really pissed, and what are you guys doing? And it's, I mean, there's kind of like, well, you let us into practice. Like, you have to understand that if we're going to be in practice, that we're going to say what we saw and what we think, right? We're not just going to eat off your platter of this is what we want you to say. So I'm not saying that, look, I'm not complaining about the access. We had this opportunity, but I guess I'm saying, like, that it became, for me, like, this has become a balancing act too of, if you do have this privilege, you can't abuse the privilege. And I think that's where kind of the trust factor builds up that you guys were talking about. And maybe in a weird sort of way that I still can't totally wrap my mind around, but maybe we betrayed that trust in a way that we didn't understand that we were, or maybe we said too much, or maybe we were too effusive in our praise. Maybe there's a way to say, hey, it wouldn't shock me were Rob Bolden to be the starting quarterback of the opener, rather than, wow, it's really obvious Rob Bolden's the best guy. You're kind of saying the same thing without hitting people over the head with it, and without cutting off without boxing the coach into a corner, because then all of a sudden Joe's got to respond to that. And that's the last thing, certainly it's the last thing he wanted at that point. But it's the last thing any coach wants, right, is to give someone a privilege or an opportunity that they don't necessarily feel like they necessarily want to have as part of the program anyway, but it's their obligation because of a contract, and then it comes back to bite them. So I think there's kind of a balancing act, and I would say that when you're given the story, right, like, part of your job is to show them, hey, I'm going to do a good job with this story, and I'm going to tell it in the right way. And so then the next time I ask you for something, you can say, hey, we can trust Donnie. He's going to come in and he's going to tell the story the right way.
That's exactly the point. That now, more than maybe 5 years ago, it's harder to tell. It's harder to get the permission to tell that story,
right,
than it was. I mean, we have another local kid on the team changed his name, added his mother's married name. Workman White, yeah. And I asked, you know, hey, can I talk to his mother? I'm still waiting for a call. But that would have been a great story for Penn State, for Naeem. It would have been a great story, but
right,
it never happened. It happened. The story happened, but the mother was not.
John, you and I exchanged emails and talked a little bit about this. You mentioned that there are probably some stories that are legitimate stories that the universities would like to have told, and that can be an avenue toward gaining some of that trust, where you're not writing a story just for them, but it might benefit both of them.
Yeah, like if there are stories out there that it's legitimately newsworthy, don't just be a shill, you know, for the university, but it's a legitimate newsworthy story that's interesting, and it's something the coach wants to tell, or the school wants to tell. That's a way to maybe open the door a little bit, and you tell that well, and I mean, to Dave's point, and then you've built that relationship, or there's something that's near and dear to the heart of a coach, You know, maybe it was some charity, or there's some unique aspect to that charity, or something in his background. And maybe there's a way into the door to at least have that access and that dialogue, you know?
We had just to tell a story, last Thanksgiving, maybe it was 2 Thanksgivings ago, Franklin let us hang out with his family before Thanksgiving. And we did, it was literally just a family story. And it was our Penn State intern, but he was writing for the Inquirer, and he was representing the Inquirer. And we got photo and reporting access. And we had tried to get that story for several weeks, and they did let us in. And I mean, it was a nice story. There wasn't anything controversial about it. It wasn't anything, you know, no expose of any kind. But you know, it was a really nice story to tell on Thanksgiving, which is what we wanted to have. And I think it was something that they liked to have told. It showed them the side of Franklin, who had been a year into his into coaching Penn State, had not yet even settled into his new home because he had been so busy. He had hit the ground running, got hired in recruiting, off-season, season, and he had not even settled into his new house. So I think there's probably another example of that.
I think what's really interesting about covering college athletics too is this balancing act, right, of there is, and this doesn't just apply here, but I think it kind of applies across the board. Thin-skinned is the wrong way to put it, but I think, you know, everyone wants to put a good face on it, kind of along the lines of the story you're talking about, Gary, right, where you get like the human side of it. And certainly O'Brien's family story was an incredible story, and I think everyone picked up on that, and it made them relatable. The challenge in college athletics in particular is when you do have to tell the negative story. And it seems to take on a life of its own in a very different way than it might in a professional organization. And, you know, I know that. I think that's where the particular challenge of college athletics, in my mind, and you guys maybe can speak to it more, but that's where the particular challenge of college athletics comes in.
Yeah, well, it's basically professional sports already, if we're being honest, college sports.
Sure.
I mean, but yeah, I mean.
But they don't see themselves that way.
Well,
They
some
don't. Some do.
Some colleges don't have that. I mean, you're talking about Penn State and Alabama and Clemson, but then there's a school like Temple, which is, you know, Temple was very good this year. They beat Penn State, and they almost beat Notre Dame, and you know, but Temple they have access limitations, but we can get access to them anytime. We don't have the Penn State kind of rules with them, because that's a different tier down. You're talking about those schools are like professional schools, Penn State. But how many are there? You know, there's those, and then there's other companies.
Well, and another thing about access too, we haven't talked much about, but there's access that we're talking about with interviews and talking to people, and then there's access in going to get records and documents. And that's something that just I think we need to do more and more. And I know that's a huge challenge here in Pennsylvania with the open records laws. I've made my share of requests in the state, so I know that. But I just see fewer and fewer college sports beat writers across the country, just speaking across the country, where I see that they're writing stories based on open records. I mean, I think that you should always have your coaches' contracts, AP's contracts, NCAA revenue and expense reports, NCAA violations, getting stuff, even like admission rates for athletes compared to the rest of the university body. And if you hold on to all those, you've got that over time, the track record. You can keep looking back and seeing, you know, trends.
It seemed after the Sandusky saga, there was a big push here in Pennsylvania for more openness from state institutions. I'm just curious why, you know, Donnie and Gary, why you guys think that has failed or really didn't carry on after that?
Well, I think one of the reasons probably is that the Sandusky, the whole thing, it didn't go away, but it sort of resolved so quickly in Penn State's favor at the end, that I think that story really, it isn't as much a live story. You always think when we have these hot stories that they're gonna be the ones that make the difference. This is the one we're gonna do the change. And then after a while, you know, okay, so they went a year with 15 scholarships or whatever, and then they got some of their scholarships back, and they got all the scholarships back. Then they got the wins back, and it's like, okay, now they have everything back, and they have a new coach, and they're going to do the stadium, and that story doesn't have that kind of pull anymore. You see that in different parts of society, gun laws and things like that, that you think, oh, this is the mass shootings that's going to do it. But those stories tend to move on just like this one did. And that, in my view, that's probably the main reason it didn't have a long enough life to move through a state legislature where maybe the governor is one party and the Congress is another and that kind of thing. And you need a little more, it needs more momentum. And I think the momentum really stalled at some point when everything started moving back in Penn State's favor. And it was only 4 years ago that, or 5 years ago, not even 5 years ago, this all happened. And it's already, they got everything back and they're full scholarship and everything.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. I mean, it did kind of circle back to Penn State. There were so many people who, on the board and alumni in the state who didn't want it to change at all. Didn't think there was any reason to change that. But I think some of them still have some sway. But I think another, as far as within the football program, I think changing the coaches as quickly as that happened. With Bill being here for 2 years and then going to James, they did things differently. I think that in certain ways Bill was more open than James, and in other ways James is more open than Bill. So I think that to get information is I think when everyone said openness and transparency, I think was the word they used. They were thinking, oh, it's going to be a much different avenue to go down here, but it really it didn't change all that much from Joe to Bill to Franklin, and while that was going on, as Gary said, it just all kind of circled back toward Penn State, and you don't have the free flow of information that I think everybody would have envisioned would have happened when the whole scandal hit.
Who else has questions?
Do you find, especially with the bigger schools and more in the regular season, is there a difference between the access granted to television on the national and local versus, the day-to-day beat people?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, look, I'll get better access than some local people. I mean, I've been there on the other side, so I get that.
You're a hypocrite, in other words? No.
I'll take access when I get access. But, I mean, look, they've got SEC network, they've got the Big Ten network. I mean, as Dave was saying, there's an equity partnership and sharing that.
But aside from those,
yeah.
I mean, when...
For national media companies?
Yeah, like when
national
ESPN comes in,
Yeah.
does Nick
Yeah.
roll over and let them have what they want, or does he control it, or does...
I wouldn't say roll over, no rolls over Nick Saban, but I mean, he'll...
They're doing like live shots from the Alabama weight room and stuff.
They do the live shot like that. He'll talk to certain national media that he'll do one-on-one and do stories.
But players too? I mean,
Every now and then. For instance, a couple years ago, A.J. McCarron just was not a very good interview with the beat writers. And at the time, I was sort of a columnist doing some enterprise stuff in Alabama. And he just would not give stuff, just wasn't very open, just wasn't. And then there's a Sports Illustrated cover story as it's going up for the Heisman Trophy. He's in a competition for it, where he's just opening up all kinds of stuff that he's never told the beat writers. So that's kind of what you deal with when you're a local writer.
This is fascinating to me. I remember when I was at ESPN and I was covering, just doing play-by-play, and I went out to Gonzaga and spent time with Mark Few and his staff. And I mean, anyone who knows him, like if you've spent any time around him, he is one of the greatest guys you'll ever be around. And I mean, literally, like doing the game, you're going out to dinner, and he's just unbelievable. And then I was talking to a guy who was a local guy in Spokane. He's like, we get nothing from them. Literally nothing. So, it's not, I guess what I'm saying is, these are institutional decisions, right? Like this guy, I can't believe that if the Spokane, whatever it is, said to Mark face to face, like, hey, I'd like to spend, I just know I keep doing it, right? Because that's just kind of the guy he is. He's not going to say no. But these are institutional decisions of what we're prioritizing and what we're not prioritizing. And it almost feels like, kind of Don Quixote with the windmills sometimes, that it's not, you can't help but to take it personally, because it is personal, because they're standing in your way of doing your job, and it's not fair that who you're associated with gives you more or less ability to do your job, and yet institutionally, there's kind of nothing you can do about it, right? I mean, that's got to be the frustration is, hey, I know that I could do a great story if given the opportunity to do it.
Well, one thing I wonder, I mean, do local media outlets as a whole sell themselves enough and talk enough to the schools about getting access and selling what telling your story to us will bring to your university? Where's the self-interest? I mean, for instance, if websites or newspapers were to do more recruiting websites, I mean, that's something that there's a self-interest for the school because they want that information out there. There's some connection between you and the coaches getting that information. Or, you know, just having that dialogue with the schools that as a local outlet, we're directly talking to your alumni, to your fans, to your boosters, the people who are buying your tickets. It may have no shot, but I just wonder if local media is selling itself enough.
I think that's a fair point, and I know for a fact that my ability to get a one-on-one interview with the Penn State head coach skyrockets when there is a Penn State recruit in the Scranton-Wilkes-Barre area that Penn State wants. And it just, you know, I think I got 3 one-on-one interviews with O'Brien, and I'm like, the last one I thought about even turning down because it just sounded, it was like, why would he want to talk to me? But, you know, they're recruiting somebody in the area, as it turned out. And, you know, we have Connor McGovern now. We have him out of Wilkes-Barre. Last year, when they're recruiting McGovern, I get a call that James Franklin wants to talk to me. I go, oh, okay, that's great. So you get a bunch of stories like that. So I think that generally they know, especially if you've done it for a long time, they know what your footprint is circulation-wise and all that, and what you bring, especially if you're a bigger paper in Pennsylvania. We're not one of the bigger ones, but we're not smaller. But you know, we do talk to the alumni and to the recruits and to the fans, and they understand that. I just think that, you know, sometimes that you do get forgotten, and that is a little frustrating. And in their defense, and there's how many beat writers covering Penn State? 20, 25? It's a huge beat, and there is a lot of demands. So I do try to understand that, but yeah, I do realize that my access gets better when they have something to gain from that, and it's frustrating to me, but it's part of the game that we have to play.
Yeah. There's all this talk about how they're making it harder for a beat guy to do his job or her job. Is it maybe time to redefine what a beat person does in this sense? We've always hidden from the fact that, you know, the newspaper spends money to have you travel around, be around the team a lot. You know more about the team than anybody at your paper. Why are you not more of an analyst? I mean, if they're not going to allow you to be a conduit of information, they're not going to allow you to do features. Why don't you be an analyst?
Some of us are.
Yeah,
Donnie and I are both beat writers and columnists. We have a few in the state that cover Penn State that way, not many. Donnie and I, we're probably about the only 2 that are actually beat writer columnists.
Yeah.
The rest there's a clear distinction between the feature person and the columnist.
Do you think having the analytical voice hurts you
Yes.
in a relationship with the beat side of it?
I do think so. Because
But
I
they're
probably
not going to let you talk to
things.
anybody anyway.
Yeah.
What does it matter?
What's that?
If they're not going to let you talk to anybody anyway,
Well,
then what's
That's why I don't try to play their game. I don't have, they're not gonna give us anything anyway. So if you play the game hoping that they'll give you something, it's kind of self-defeating purpose. We don't get, yeah, we might get an extra interview if there's a recruit in our area, but how often is that? So,
I think it's just approaching it from different ways and seeing what works. I write columns all throughout the season. I write long-form features. Every weekend we have a wrap-around our paper. I've been really lucky with my one-on-one interviews, but that's because the paper that I work for has been, the local paper for long before I was born, clearly. And so I got lucky in that sense. I think I also got lucky that the sports information department and the coaching staff, being from out west, they weren't really familiar with me. They've been familiar with most of the guys on the beat for a while now. and the voice is there. And I think that was something that I capitalized on because I knew that that was something to my advantage. They wanted to see what kind of opinions I had and what kind of writer I am, and what kind of voice I would bring to the beat. And I think that they thought that it was going to be advantageous to them, and I felt it was advantageous to me to capitalize on that. The same goes for recruiting. I don't get coaches reaching out to me about recruiting. I go out and I find them myself, because at this point, the only way you're going to build up a sourcing relationship with a player is if you grab them when they're a high school kid. And then you lose a year of the dark period when they're freshmen and you can't talk to them. And then maybe you're in contact with the coach, but it's all about kind of the long game in this sense. And it's difficult and it's challenging, especially when at my paper, I got to write a feature for a long form feature every weekend for the wrap that goes around the whole paper. And so if you don't get a parent, or if you don't get a coach that calls you back, or maybe they give you, like they gave me and Ryan 6 to 10 features, and we sat down and they scheduled them 20 minutes apart on one day. So we sat down one day and did 6 to 10 features and just cranked them out, and then half the guys got injured. So we're having to try and build stories off of those players that were injured, and then it's like, well, we gave you these guys earlier in the year, so what's the problem, kind of a thing. So it's just interesting. You kind of have to go about it in different ways, like what Donnie was saying, and it's tough because you want to write the best story you possibly can, but if you're not getting the parent calling you back, or you're not getting a player to try and make up for the fact that you interviewed Akeel Lynch before the season started, and then Saquon Barkley happened. So why would you write the same story about Akeel Lynch being ready to step into the top role when it's clearly he's not? That's what your interview was about, and he's not there. So it's just kind of it's been interesting, but I do think that I personally had a little bit of an advantage this particular last season, because I think they were kind of testing me a little bit, which was. It was interesting that they would do that, and it was kind of clear that they were doing that. And so I'm probably not going to get the same kinds of opportunities this next year, and that's just a reality.
Anybody else? Any students want?
I just want to say one thing, and then we should probably wrap up for this panel. But the one thing that we preach to our students here, and I would say it as a former editor of the AP, and just as somebody who studies sports journalism, is there's so much, and I'm thinking now particularly about the pros, about Ravens.com and Eagles.com. There's so much information that the team not only can give you access to or not give you access to, but all the transactional stuff that that used to be the daily grist of a sports beat writer is now essentially broken by the team. But I would really jump on John's point and say that, particularly to the students, knowing how to file a FOIA request, having your coach's contract, if it's a public record, is just like you've got to have those things. And we have a course now in covering the business of sports, and our hashtag is Who Gets Paid. And if you just look at that, if you follow that, you're going to have a steady flow of stories. Maybe not, just every single day features on the beat, but you'll have important stories going down the line. It's a way to get around access, essentially. I mean, we're talking about the thing that's most important. So.
Well, thank you guys. I appreciate it.